So let's begin. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk today, presenting work done at University of Michigan, Penn State, and the Future of Privacy Forum, looking at challenges researchers face when studying privacy policies. But before I start, I want to give a quick shout out to the brave graduate students at University of Michigan who are currently on strike for a living wage and dignified working conditions. To learn more about the strike, feel free to check out these links above. Google University of Michigan strike, or come talk to me after the session. But now on to research. To start, I want to introduce you to this beautiful document, which is a privacy policy. Privacy policies are documents that companies use to describe their data practices. And they're important because oftentimes they're one of the few ways that consumers, legislators, regulators, and privacy watchdogs have of interfacing with a company and knowing what the data practices are. This is a researcher. And researchers are also interested in studying privacy policies and do so for a wide variety of reasons, such as understanding data practices of entities, examining the usability of privacy policies, developing tools that help summarize privacy policies, and much more. Privacy policy research has been and is incredibly important. They can help audit and reveal bad practices of companies. They can make privacy policies more usable and usable for a wide variety of stakeholders. And in short, privacy policy research can help catalyze transparency and accountability for companies that collect user data. However, the issue is that these things are kind of tough to study. So tools and infrastructure support is relatively scarce. And despite years of privacy policy research under our belts, we still don't know a lot about how researchers study privacy policies. And this is a shame, given the importance that this research has. So this led us to formulate the following research questions. How do researchers study privacy policies? And what challenges do they face when doing so? All in pursuit of this overarching goal. What can we do as a community to facilitate and improve privacy policy research? To answer these questions, we conducted in-depth interviews with researchers who had studied privacy policies. We asked questions about their workflow, how they went about studying privacy policies, challenges they faced when doing so, and what they would want or what could make this type of work easier. We recruited 26 researchers who at some point in their careers had worked with privacy policies. We recruited a diverse group of participants coming from different departments, at different career stages, and different levels of expertise studying privacy policies. Now to move on to our findings. In structuring our findings, we identified various stages of privacy policy research, each with their own associated set of challenges. So first is policy selection, so choosing what policies you're going to study. Policy retrieval, so going out into the wild and getting the policies, bringing them, formatting them away, making them easy for analysis. Policy, actually the analysis, so reading through and coming up with useful insights and data. And finally, we identified overarching challenges that affected researchers throughout the whole study process. So on to the first one, policy selection. So when it came to choosing policies, there wasn't really like a challenge, right? Just people, depending on their research question and depending on a variety of factors, chose which policies to study. But the key thing that we noticed is that it varied a lot. And this theme of variation is important. Everyone was doing something different. And in fact, we identified that there were really very few, if none, best practices or guidelines that emerged. This was true not only for the policy selection process, but throughout the entire privacy policy research pipeline. Every researcher is doing their own thing, both in terms of choosing what to study, figuring out how to get the policies, actually getting the policies, analyze them, and so on and so forth. And as a consequence, this means that participants were constantly reinventing the wheel and having to rethink what these processes should be. A significant amount of time and energy was spent trying to figure out these processes, time that could be better spent actually analyzing the policies. A second finding, now onto policy retrieval, is that this can be quite challenging. Not going to lie, when I entered the study, I thought all the problems were going to be with the analysis, but it was pretty tough to actually find the policies for various reasons. The one that I want to highlight today is what our participants called dynamic privacy policies. So participants mentioned how many websites used JavaScript and sort of loaded privacy policies dynamically. which presented privacy policies in ways that were consumer-friendly and in fun, bite-sized pieces. But as a result, it was difficult to find one document where all the information was. So, for example, this is an example of how Meta presents its privacy. And you can tell how, it's fun, it's colorful, it's bright, but there are all these links all over the place. You constantly have to jump around, move from place to place. Things pop up, things pop down. You don't know where you're going, you're lost. And if I want to analyze this, it's very difficult to download. How do I go about doing this? Moving on to the analysis, again, several challenges, but perhaps the key complaint was that policies were full of jargon and vague. A quick question, how many people here have read a policy, privacy policy from start to finish? Okay, you all know the pain then, that the jargon makes it difficult to understand what the policies are saying, and the vagueness makes it difficult to understand what they mean, even if you manage to understand what they're saying. And there were lots of quotes from participants complaining about this, but the one I liked the best is this one. When talking about the analysis, they said the conclusion from it was if 5 people, all of which have PhDs or getting a PhD, cannot agree on an interpretation, what hope do you have for lay people? And this frustration bled over into participants accusing companies of making privacy policies intentionally obscure. So this participant went as far as saying that privacy policies were written adversarially to obscure what is actually happening. And this vagueness and jargon makes it not only annoying to read, but it also means it becomes very tough to scale out analysis and study a lot of privacy policies. We identified 3 methods participants used to study privacy policies, all of which with their own drawbacks. The most straightforward was for researchers to analyze privacy policies themselves, but this was time-consuming and exhausting and severely limited the number of policies one could study, in the tens of policies, if that. And there were also a lot of uncertainty over what the correct interpretation and a lot of self-doubt was, given the vagueness. The second approach was to hire outside help, either in terms of legal experts or crowd workers, but this too presented issues. So legal workers were too expensive, and crowd workers were too unreliable. And lastly, participants tried making use of machine learning tools and techniques to automate part of the analysis. In theory, these tools could go through many different policies in a short amount of time, and they're often free to use. So this solves a time and a financial issue. However, these tools were found to be unreliable, out of date, not well maintained, and also it was difficult to understand how accurate or useful a specific tool was for your study, particularly for non-technical users. And finally, I want to highlight 2 overarching challenges. First, sticking with tools for a minute, one challenge was the availability and maintenance of research tools. Participants really liked and wanted to use tools to help summarize policies, help retrieve policies, but the problem is these tools were out of date and not well maintained. And in fact, maintenance of a tool was revealed to be a large problem given the constant evolving nature of software, online websites, companies changing up the format of their websites, and changing legislation and other factors. So this is best encapsulated by this quote by a participant who had created a tool and released it, of like, we can get this tool, this framework, this code, whatever, to the finish line, but then the finish line moves. And the final finding I want to highlight is that there's really no home for privacy policy research. There are venues one can submit to, but often they belong to another field. So maybe it's a CS venue, an HCI venue, law, healthcare, venues of another focus, of which privacy policies are a subset. And as such, there's no real single place where privacy policies should sit. This lack of home created disciplinary silos. So privacy policy analysis is inherently a cross-disciplinary exercise for which there is no natural home. And without one, it becomes difficult to break out of your bubble because you end up publishing in your own discipline and meeting people from your own discipline, and it becomes very difficult to meet people from other disciplines. And there is also a lack of appreciation for behind-the-scenes work, such as building the infrastructure to collect these policies, creating tools to analyze them at scale, and wading through the dense wordage of these policies. Reviewers unfamiliar with these unseen labor may dismiss papers out of hand because the results are not impressive, ignoring the vast behind-the-scenes efforts that produce those results in the first place. This can be very discouraging and prevent good research from being published. So those were some of the key findings. This now begs the question, now that we have them, How do we overcome them? And how do we better facilitate privacy policy research? Today, I want to highlight 4 avenues. First is to develop best practices for privacy policy research. This would help reduce duplication efforts by researchers, meaning that time and effort can be saved and dedicated towards actually analyzing privacy policies, not reinventing the wheel and rethink the same ideas that a ton of researchers have thought before you. And additionally, it would help onboard new researchers unfamiliar with privacy policy research. Our findings showcase interesting opportunities for developing tools that facilitate privacy policy research, including data sets for certain privacy policies, tools that automatically identify them online and collect them, tools that compare code with privacy policies, and many more which can be read about in the paper. Crucially, it is important to keep in mind that maintenance is, there has to be a maintenance plan, and maintenance is key. Without this maintenance, they won't be much use to researchers. And we discuss in the paper opportunities for incentivizing tool maintenance, including increasing availability of funding and valuing tool maintenance in promotion and tenure cases. Additionally, there needs to be more work examining the non-adoption of tools. We saw that maintenance and availability was one of the barriers, but are there others? And how do we overcome them? There's no point going out and creating the next best privacy policy summarizer if no one's going to actually use it. And lastly, we should create privacy policy-specific venues. These should be interdisciplinary venues that focus on privacy policy research first, allowing opportunities for cross-discipline collaboration, as well as valuing the behind-the-scenes work that may not be appreciated in other venues. Maybe pets could be that place, but whatever that venue is or needs to be created, it needs to be interdisciplinary and with a focus on privacy policies first. And that was our study, looking at how researchers study privacy policies and the challenges they face when doing so. I think I'm nearly at time, but I look forward to hearing all of your questions.
First question, how did you find and select the researchers you interviewed?
So it was a fairly systematic process. So what we did to find the researchers was we went through various scholarly search engines, such as Google Scholar, and we searched for terms privacy policy or privacy policies, privacy documents. We filtered based on papers that had been published in the last 5 years and that had privacy policy in their abstract. We then read the papers to make sure that they were relevant and they actually studied privacy policies. And then we had a series of papers, and then we started emailing the first authors or the contact author of that paper. And then after a while, we noticed that we'd interviewed some folks, and they were leaning towards being very CS heavy and very US heavy. So then we tried to selectively choose researchers who were not in a CS discipline and were outside of a US context.
Given the problems discussed in privacy policies relevant to consumers, I've advocated for more inline privacy notifications at the time of data collection or use rather than in a dense legal document. Have any of the researchers looked into how to research privacy notifications in a diverse notification universe?
None of the participants mentioned that explicitly. I think that the closest could come going back again to this idea of dynamic privacy policies, where privacy notices, I think, can be very useful for consumers because they can reveal them in time and you're not barraging them with text. But then that maybe makes it difficult to find one place where all of it is collected in a nice, neat package where researchers can study. Now, this doesn't mean we should automatically exclude what's best for consumers just to make it easier for researchers. But there is a lot more work that needs to be done to figuring out how to get these notices in a way that makes them to be easily analyzed.
It is true that the work needed to even be able to make an analysis is often invisible, but if the results do not bring new insights, should they still be published because there is lots of work behind? How do you think we should go about this?
I think it's a balance. I mean, this is a broader sort of question about if someone carries out good research and they have non-impressive results, should those results be published? And for me personally, my own thing is that yes, because I think it leads to issues such as people like the replication prices, people not wanting to replicate studies because the findings may not be that impressive, issues where people selectively choose questions or deliberately frame in ways that make it seem sexy and appealing without realizing the work. So my own personal bias is if the research is good and the methodology is solid, even unimpressive results are still results. So my own take is that they should be published, but it should be a wider conversation.
Okay, last question. The type of privacy policy research you described sounds mostly reactive, retrieving and analyzing the policies. Did you discuss more proactive approaches in your interviews? For example, how to define privacy policies so very easy to analyze?
I guess I'm having a hard time understanding the question. Could you repeat it?
You described research that's mostly reactive, so retrieving and analyzing privacy policies for use in research. Did you discuss more proactive approaches in the interviews, such as how to define privacy policies so that they can be more easily analyzed?
We did not. It was mostly people who the studies that they want to talk about and the studies that we filtered on were we had gone ahead and studied a privacy policy that exists. Some participants mentioned like other documents and how they blurred the line, like terms of service, is that a privacy policy? But for the most part, it was reactive, not proactive.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again.